Welcome to the wonderful and amazing world of artificial intelligence. In this presentation, we're going to delve into a subset of artificial intelligence called generative AI. And you'll hear us refer to it throughout the presentation as Gen AI. In this presentation, we'll show you how proposal professionals can use Gen AI to create better proposals, reduce proposal development time, and reduce the overall cost of creating high-scoring proposals. In this presentation, we have 5 objectives. The first is to provide a basic introduction to generative AI. We want to level set all of the participants so that we have a common understanding of large language models and the basics of prompt engineering. Once we do that, and that'll be about the third of this presentation, we'll delve into our Proposal Development Center and show you how we use enterprise AI models, how we build complex prompts, and how we manage a company's private data library consisting of past proposals and resumes and other artifacts. We'll look at some of the workflows that we use to assist proposal development professionals, and we'll show you real-world examples of how we can create usable content for proposals with these tools. We'll talk about some of the lessons learned that we have from onboarding clients to use our Proposal Development Center, and maybe, hopefully, will inspire you to lead your company's AI transformation and become leaders in this new technology. When we do these presentations in person, we typically ask the audience to tell us what experience level they have with Gen AI. Typically, 50% of the people say they have no experience with generative AI. Another 40% will admit they're beginners, and we see a few that claim to be journeymen, and occasionally a straggler or two that say they're experts or even an AI scientist. Having a distribution like this is not unusual, particularly when you consider the timeline for artificial intelligence. AI models have been around for a while, but it wasn't until November of 2022 that OpenAI connected a natural language processing front end with a generative pre-trained transformer, called it ChatGPT, and pushed it out into the market. By January of 2023, just 2 months later, over 100 million people had subscribed to their OpenAI platform. In April of 2023, we decided to go all in on generative AI. One of the fortunate things about being CEO of a company is you get to pick the projects that you want to work on. And I wanted to lead our AI initiative. I was fortunate to have some truly gifted professionals on our team. And I won't call out their names, but let me say something about their backgrounds. One of our consultants was a former Naval Postgraduate School AI fellow. So we had in our team a genuine AI scientist to help us with the statistic models that underlie generative AI. We had another member of our team who's an MIT grad and former senior vice president of a major aerospace and defense contractor who wanted to join the team, learn about AI, and head up our training activities. We're also fortunate to have 3 APMP fellows in our employment who wanted to participate in the development of AI for capture and proposal professionals. And then we had some engineers that joined the team as well. So kicking off the initiative, we had a terrific group of people, all enthusiastic and wanted to make a major change in the way we practice our business to use these new tools. The first thing that we learned when we started our Gen AI Proposal Development Center is that we needed to train our consulting team on how to use Gen AI tools. We have 150 professionals on our roster, and only a few had experience with Gen AI. We looked at training classes, but couldn't find any that were appropriate for us, given the use case that we wanted to pursue, and that's business winning with AI tools to assist capture and proposal professionals and business development professionals. So we created our own training class and began moving our consulting team through the training program in cohorts of 20 people. We also had to select an AI platform, and we looked at public platforms like OpenAI's ChatGPT, Google Bard, Meta's Llama platform, and Anthropic Claude. We also looked at private enterprise platforms, those by Procurement Sciences and Rohirrim. We were also fortunate to be one of the first companies to get a license from Microsoft to run Azure OpenAI services and build out a platform on our own inside of Microsoft's commercial cloud. We also realized that we had to create a prompt library for professional proposal managers, and then we would use these prompts in our workflows to create proposal products. We also had to develop a roadmap to onboard clients who wanted to join us in our GenAI Proposal Development Center. We began our evaluation of generative AI models by looking at ChatGPT 3.5 and 4.0. It's a terrific model, broadly trained, but it has some limitations because OpenAI can train on your prompts and train on your content. We also evaluated Google Bard. We looked at Llama from Meta. It's a good platform if you're going to build your own large language model. We liked Anthropic Claude and discovered that it's a narrowly trained model, but has some good ethical guardrails and works well in certain instances. And then Bing Chat Enterprise Edition is a terrific model because it combines the best of OpenAI with Bing Chat capability to go out and pull current information off the internet. So it's a free model for those people operating in a Microsoft enterprise with E3 and E5 licenses. We'd also looked at content generators. Jasper was good but expensive. Writer was okay. We looked at spreadsheets, and we looked at image generators because we wanted to create artwork that we could use in our proposals. All of the artwork in this presentation is created using Adobe Firefly, which does a really nice job creating little robots for us in this presentation. All of the large language models that we looked at are conversational in nature. So you can think of them this way. In the front end, you have the ability to put in a natural language query. That means just write your question the way you would write it or explain it to someone else sitting next to you. The question then goes into the large language model. You would say that the models are stateless, which means they have no memory. So they answer the question, calling on the data that they have been trained on, and produce an output. And the output can be text. It can also be audio. Some of the models will speak to you. Some will produce image and some will produce video. When you look at the output, you often want to ask a follow-up question. So we'd say, create your next query. And then the model takes both your output and your next query and passes them back into the large language model and repeats the sequence. So as you pass information from one query to the next back into the model, the context in the model is growing because it keeps feeding back the context from all previous discussions. The models have a limit on how large this context window can be. And typically, they measure it in tokens, or one page of text is about 650 tokens. Models like ChatGPT have 4,000 tokens as the size of their context window, so you can typically put 6 to 10 pages of text into the model, which is the sum of all of your queries and all of your outputs. When you write a simple query, you typically begin the query with a verb. Some work particularly well. For example, explain is a great verb to use if you're a proposal professional and you're asked to write content about a topic you really don't understand. Summarize also works well, where you could say, here's 10 pages or 20 pages of text. Please summarize it. Tell me the important points in it. I particularly like list because we use that to compose checklists for our work. And of course, you can always say, draft this section or write some text or write it in a way that convince me that this is going to be a persuasive set of text that you create. So you can play with these 50 verbs. All of them work, some better than others, but all work fine in simple prompts. When we write prompts for the large language model, we want to tell it the style of writing that we'd like to receive in the output. And the large language models can write poetry, they can write music, they can write in different languages, and they can write in different styles, from styles that look like clickbait on a website to styles that look like they're written by proposal professionals. So when you write your prompt, you want to specify the style of output that you want. Your output can be text, or it can be tables. It can be outlines for PowerPoint charts or bullet points. I'm always amazed at how well it does tables. We have different use cases for prompts. Some are simple when we say just generate proposal text for us. Others are really good at brainstorming. So you might say to the large language model, I have to write a professional response around this topic. Give me 25 ideas that I can use as I write my document. Someone will edit and edit well, particularly if you've written 10 pages of text and you need to reduce it to 7. The model will do that task for you in 15 seconds. Then you have to come back as a subject matter expert and make sure you didn't cut out anything that was particularly important. If you want to look at a topic that you don't know much about, you can ask the model to go do research, just like a research professional would do. One of the most popular things that a model will do is it acts like a knowledge management system. So if you put enough data into your private company library, you can query it and ask it questions about the data in your library, just as if you had spent thousands of dollars to build and maintain a knowledge management system. The model will also tutor you if you don't understand a topic, and it will role play if you want to do questions and answers. Large language models have some interesting characteristics. I mentioned the one before that they're stateless. So if you put too much data into a conversation, the model begins forgetting what you put in the first conversations. So conversations are time weighted. Otherwise, the model would appear to be ignoring your most recent question. And the conversations get truncated when you have too much content in the context window. Some large language models will hallucinate depending on how you prompt them. And you can control hallucinations to some extent, but the models will make up data that doesn't exist in order to provide a forceful result. Some models exhibit bias, and it comes from the way they're trained and the way they're tuned. And ChatGPT was originally criticized because it stopped learning in its first round in September of 2021. But we find that's really not an issue. There's lots of ways of working around that. I told our graphic artist team that I wanted to pull back the cover and show everyone what we do inside of our Gen AI Proposal Development Center. They may have gotten a little enthusiastic with the artwork here, but this is what they produced. It always puts a smile on my face to see the curtains draw back. So when we set up our Gen AI Proposal Development Center, we had two principal objectives. One is that we wanted to create better proposals, and that was the primary objective, make them better. But we also realized that we could reduce the time that it takes to create proposals, and perhaps we could reduce the cost for our clients by as much as 30%. The second thing is we were obsessed about security. What we put into these models had to be secure. It had to be preserved so that only our clients could access that data. We wanted models that wouldn't train on the data or train on the prompts that we provide. So our Proposal Development Center looks like this. And at the top, we have our generative AI model. And this could be various different models depending on which vendor works best for you. The second layer in the center were value-added services that we provide. We created a chatbot based on the 7 books that we've written on how to win business in the government market. So you can ask the chatbot simple questions like, how do you write a strength in a proposal? And it'll give you good answers. We wanted to make sure that all that we did preserved our strength-based winning methodology. So the prompts that we create reinforce that methodology. We wanted to have a proprietary prompt library that all of our consulting team could share and that we could share with clients on our Gen AI Center. We soon found that clients wanted to be onboarded in the center, and we set up an engagement success manager to manage the onboarding process. We also provide proposal experts to help them with their proposal preparation. To make these tools work well for clients, they need to provide their company proprietary data and host it in the model. So we set up a team of people to manage the onboarding of the data, to clean the data, to organize the data, and prepare it for use in the model. And then finally, we needed a team of experts to train on classes for people to learn how to use generative AI for proposals and to help our clients reskill their workforce. So as you become a tenant or a participant in our training classes, we set up a training tenant here where you can log into the model. You go into the training tenant and it's pre-populated with sample company proprietary data. All the data is not actually proprietary. It's taken off the internet where proposals are delivered and displayed in full content on the internet. So we use those in our training tenant, and students can come in and practice the development of prompts, practice the workflows, and generate real proposal content using the proprietary data. Once they do that, the companies come back and they can get their own client tenant in the model, and they'll onboard their company proprietary data and then work inside that tenant with licenses to access the model. And then, of course, we provide assistance to them, the training that they need, and we help them with the proposals. So the tenants go from one to as many as we want to onboard. One of the things that happened that we didn't expect was that some of our consulting team said they wanted to use the AI tools to work on a proposal, whether the client was onboarding in a tenant or not. And we asked the clients if this was okay for us to use AI tools, and we got an affirmative answer. So we told them we were going to stand up a project tenant. We'll use their company data in that project tenant to write a proposal. And once that proposal is done, we'll close out the tenant. So we're now standing up multiple project tenants for individual clients. When we build prompts in our Gen AI Proposal Development Center, we typically follow this 7-step format, although we have about a dozen different formats that we use for prompts. You typically begin the prompt by saying, who am I and what writing style do I want to use? So in this case, we might say something like, I'm writing a management plan for an Air Force bid to build flight software, and I'd like you to respond for an audience of technical professionals that work in the government that are going to evaluate my proposal. That's pretty sufficient to get you started. Then we add context to the prompt, and we'll pick sections of the RFP that we want to address. So if you're going to build a response for a particular section in the statement of work, you would excerpt that section and copy it into the prompt. Now, we hear people say that they'd like to put the whole RFP in and then reference it. The problem with doing that is the model becomes diluted by the size of the context window and begins lopping pieces of it off. So we find it's a much better practice to just focus on sections of the RFP. So we'll focus on the statement of work. We might add in the appropriate sections with the proposal instructions and the appropriate evaluation criteria, but we want to keep that fairly narrow. We might also add special instructions to the prompt, like I want to understand the strengths that we can propose in our approach in building this section of the proposal. So your response might begin with one of the 50 words, and you can say something like, summarize the following information, and give it the RFP section C, L, and M that are relevant, and it'll come back with a summary. You can say and should say, I'd like an output, and let's bound the output. So if I'm going to ask for text, I might say I want 2 pages or 3 pages of text on this topic. I don't like to work in larger formats than that. Or I might say I want a table and I want 7 items in my table. We tell people don't try to write the ultimate prompt. Use chain of thought to prompt. So write a fairly simple prompt, get your first response, review the response, and then ask a second prompt. So we call this chain of thought prompting. When we started prompt engineering, we had some surprising lessons learned. The first is that we thought you could write a prompt and it would work well across all models. What we learned is that's not the case. Some prompts work better in one model than in a different model. And we learned that you need to take the basic prompt and then tweak it a bit for different RFPs and for different AI models. Prompts produce different results each time you run them. So the models are stochastic, not deterministic. So if you ask a question using your prompt and you don't get the answer you want, run it again. And sometimes we'll run a prompt multiple times as part of a workflow. For example, if you said, here's some text, give me a list of all the things that I need to address in this section of the RFP. Run the model once, you get that list. and then ask the model to run it again. And then the third time, you take the two outputs from the first two questions and tell the model combine them. Do not duplicate and produce for you a consolidated list. And then if you're really clever, you can ask the model to verify that that list addresses everything in that text. So we use multiple models, multiple prompts to get the results we want. We told people in the beginning that we wanted production quality prompts, but we soon learned that an 80% prompt is good enough because we'll run it multiple times or we'll tweak it. So we stopped putting a huge effort into writing the perfect prompt, saying just 80% is good enough. When we write prompts for real proposal work, we call them complex prompts, and they look something like this. In the beginning, there's a system prompt. Often this is embedded in the large language model, where it tunes the model to produce specific types of responses. In some models, we can go in and redefine the system prompt or modify the system prompt. So we'll look at that first. The next is choosing a context, and we want to choose the appropriate amount of context for the model to work on. Before we run the context in the model, there's a stage here called retrieval augmented generation, where we can take some models and go out to the internet and pull current information into the model through this RAG step, retrieval augmented generation. We can also use plugins that work in some models. In some models, we can write queries to external databases and pull data in. So that's particularly important if you're looking at perhaps logistics or inventory questions. We want to access your own company data in this model, not just data from the internet or data that the model was trained on. So we set up an enterprise library for companies so that they can store past RFPs and proposals. We like resumes in here because when you have to select resumes for a proposal, you can go through your entire inventory of resumes and pick the ones most appropriate. Past performance is always good because we want to cite proofs in our proposal that we've done this kind of work before, and maybe capture plans and customer calls and technical data all comprises your company's library. And we want to be able to pull those data facts into the prompt. Then we write our prompt with the verb saying, this is what I want. It runs in the large language model and we get an output. Now the output, it's important it goes to a subject matter expert for validation. Outputs from these models do not go to clients. They don't go outside your company. They're retained by the proposal professional to help them create content. So the subject matter expert validates and will often send back into the large language model corrections to the model or additional information. And then it runs the output and it goes through this looping process back and forth till we finally get to the end of the journey where we have some content that we might move out and say, this is a draft of this section of the proposal. So that's what a typical large, complex prompt workflow looks like. So let me give you an example of a prompt that you might want to run as a proposal professional. And this is one where we reverse engineer the prompt persona and writing style. And we do it from a sample of a customer's proposal. So going back to the format that we prescribe for prompts, the who and the what is what we want to generate. The context that we provide is 5 to 10 well-written pages from their past proposal. And then we write these instructions. These are a chain of thought prompts, so you do them sequentially. Then the first one is to say, what's the persona and writing style that best describes this text? And then the second prompt is, if I want to use this persona and writing style in a prompt, how should I describe it in the next prompt? Here's an example of how this prompt looks when you run it in the large language model. At the top, you can see start context and end context. And this is where I would paste in the 5 to 10 pages from the proposal. And my query was really simple. What's the persona and writing style that best describes this text? And in a few seconds, the model begins to respond. And it says the persona and writing style of the provided text is described below. And it gives you the attributes. It's professional and it's authoritative. It's confident. It's informative. And the writing style is formal, descriptive, persuasive, and well-structured. That's terrific, but that's a little large for what I want in the next prompt. So my second prompt in this chain of thought is to say, I want to use this persona and writing style in a prompt. And how should I describe it? And you notice here, I didn't say persona, I said person. So these large language models are really good at answering the question, even if you misspell the word. And they seem to be unmoved by your punctuation and capitalization. So if you can see the beginning of the prompt, I didn't start if with a capital I, and the I was a lowercase. So I'd fail an English class here because of my typing, but the prompt really doesn't care. So here's what it wrote back, and I'll read just a touch of the response to you, and I think you'll see it's pretty succinct. So it says here, write in a formal, descriptive, and persuasive style, emulating the voice of a professional and authoritative figure. The content should show expertise and deep knowledge in the subject matter. So this is kind of what you reverse engineer out, and then we'll take this prompt and we'll plug it in to all the subsequent prompts that we write for this client. When we work on a real proposal, we have a complex proposal workflow, and here's an illustration of how one might look. On the left side, we have our first prompt, and the prompt I chose is to create a proposal outline and an initial text response given a section of a statement of work. That response from the AI model goes to a proposal writer who reviews the proposal outline in the text, and if it needs additional work, it's cycled back through the first prompt. Now, I didn't put all the feedback loops in this model because it gets way too complex to show them in a diagram, but just visualize that at each checkpoint along the workflow, you can send the content back into the model for additional work. Once we have the structure approved and an initial text in each section of the proposal that we're going to write, we prepare an interview, a set of questions for a subject matter expert. So using the model, you don't go to a subject matter expert and say, what do you think? You go to them and say, I have 50 questions that I'm sending you in advance of your interview. I want you to be prepared to discuss each one with me. We're going to do it over a Teams call, and I'll turn on record and transcription. So when we're all done, I have at my fingertips a transcribed set of text that describes our discussion, and I can extract information out of that and feed that back into the model to have the text reflect the expert opinion of the subject matter expert. We'll do a similar exercise on strengths, where we say to the subject matter expert, we need to create strengths, and we'll set up some interview questions for that created by the model and feed that back in. So now we're producing in the fourth prompt, it says, let's write a second draft. And our fifth prompt, I might say something like, I want to lead off this section of the proposal with a list of strengths. So would you please create for me a table showing the features in our offer, the benefits to the customer, and some evidence of proofs. That the model will do that expeditiously for you. Then we send that to the proposal writer and the subject matter experts. They take a look at it and agree that those features are meritorious and that the proofs are reasonable. And then we might say to the model, please check my work and run it back against the original statement of work and make sure that I'm responsive to everything that was asked. And once we get through that workflow, the proposal writer can now advance that as a draft material for the proposal. So it's a complex workflow with complex prompts along the way. So I'm going to show you how that might work in one of the models here. So in the first prompt that we selected from the prompt library, it's to create a proposal structure and draft proposal text. Now I begin with the who am I and what do I want? And this should sound familiar to you. We pulled this text in this example from a NASA RFP. And it says here, I'm a proposal professional writing a proposal for NASA. Write in a formal, descriptive, and persuasive style, emulating the voice of a professional authoritative figure. So that text is just what we had shown before. And then we'll write the action in the format that we want. I want you to create a draft technical proposal that's compliant with the functional requirements and organized to respond to the paragraphs and headers in the statement of work. For each response, demonstrate your understanding of what's expected and provide an authoritative discussion showing how we can accomplish that. So here's that prompt entered into the model. There's the who am I statement, just as I read it to you in the prompt. And there's my request. I added a little bit at the bottom about methodology. And then we ask the model to run the results. So here's what we get when we run it. Here's the output of the proposal. There's the functional requirements, the tech approach, the research library services, and subordinate to each of these headers is some initial content. What I would say it's totally inadequate, because in this case, we ran the model using only data that the model was trained on, no external data, no company proprietary data. So think of it as a skeleton of what we would produce. The next prompt is that we want to interview a subject matter expert. So the prompt was pretty simple, and it's a chain of thought, so it follows in the sequence. And my prompt to my request, my action, is to say I'm interviewing a subject matter expert to get additional information needed to write a more complete, compelling response. Provide a list of interview questions that I can use with the subject matter expert. So here's that prompt entered into the model. And then the model begins to generate a response. And the response is pleasant. It says, certainly here's a list of interview questions tailored to each section of the proposal. And I want you to take a moment and just look at the questions it asks. So the first section of my proposal is about running a technical publications office for NASA. And the model says, well, ask the subject matter expert, what are the most common technical editing challenges that you see in running a technical publications office? How many currently, what administrative tools are using? What software are you using? Can you describe an instance where you saved the day for a customer? And what's your current operating procedures and how often are they updated? Those are absolutely terrific questions to ask a subject matter expert. And the model goes on, and for each section, it asks interview questions. Now, in this case, because I don't have a subject matter expert handy on this, we didn't take the content from the subject matter interviews and push them back into the model. Instead, we just said, these are the questions that you can ask. So the fifth prompt in the sequence, and I skipped over the one for creating strengths, and said, let's just go right to this create a strength table for my proposal. And I say in my prompt, I'd like the proposal to lead off with a features benefits proof table that highlights key features in our solution, especially focus on areas where we can exceed a contract requirement in a way that's beneficial to the customer. Set up your table with the key features on the left. The second column is the benefit to the customer. And the third column is the proof, and ask the model to go and generate it. So it now looks at your proposal, and here's what comes out. This is the table, and I'll show you the full table in just a moment. A key feature, we have advanced technical editing tools. The benefits to the customer are that these tools ensure the highest quality technical publications, reducing the need for revisions. That's pretty cool. And it's demonstrated by a 20% reduction in revision requests in past projects. Now that 20% sounds really good. It's total hallucination. And the models will do this, but it makes a great placeholder for the subject matter experts to come in and say, that's not really the proof we want to use. But the advanced editing tools is really good, and the benefit to the customer is substantial. So if you run down the list, here's all the items. It gave me 7 of them that I can use to lead off my proposal. All pretty persuasive. Certainly they need to be tweaked, but not a bad place to start. Now that I have pushed all that back through the model, I have a pretty good draft, and I'd say to this model, I'd like you to check my work. I want you to create a table for me with the RFP requirement, discuss the response that I made, and tell me whether it's adequate. And if you like, you can color score the responses so it's easy for me to see the results. So we run that in the model. Here it is. The prompt is inserted in the model. The request is here. And the proposal is in the model, and the context is already in the model since this is a sequence of prompts. And we can say, here it is. It's now scoring me. Here's my first section. I got a green, not too good on the second. Couple greens. Oops, I got a red on this piece. And I know I'm going to have to go back and rework it. I'm a little disappointed that all I'm getting is greens. I don't have a blue anywhere. There's a red. So I totally missed that one. And this gives me my next work assignment to say, go back and revisit some of these sections in the proposal and figure out how you can do them better, how you can respond better than you have in this first pass through the model. So all in all, it's a pretty good piece of work that comes out of this complex workflow, and certainly one that is suitable for an initial draft on a proposal. So I wanted to share with you some lessons that we learned from onboarding clients in our generative AI proposal center. The first one is getting their attention. And what we find is that the client is enthusiastic about using AI and assigns people to take the training, but half of the people will show up saying, I'm here because my boss said I had to be here, and not because they have any particular deep interest. So we learn from that. When we train, we want to train a lot of people, not just a select few. So the idea of a few trailblazers didn't hold up. We're now teaching classes with 20 people in them. And out of that, we get maybe 5 or 6 that become evangelists for the technology and want to change the world. So reaching critical mass takes a lot of training, but once you do it, it is unstoppable, except that the corporate lawyers show up and they never miss an opportunity to throw barricades in the path of progress. So they begin with thoughtful questions like, can you start World War III with this tool? And of course, that demonstrates only one thing, that they have no idea what they're talking about. So we produce a responsible use policy for generative AI for companies to give and circulate with their law firms. The reality of it is, in these models, they are all closed. So none of your data goes outside of the model. The models don't train on your data. They don't train on your prompts. They don't train on your company proprietary information. And the model has no connection with the outside world. So it's not giving financial advice to anyone, and it's not giving out medical advice. It's strictly an assist tool to help proposal professionals write better proposals. The next hurdle is data security, and in comes the CIO team, who never saw an opportunity to say no to something. So we have to go through a whole briefing with them to explain to them that this data is secure in these tenants. It's often in the same tenant that your SharePoint resides in, and you don't have issues with that. It's often in the same tenants that the Department of Defense uses to share warfighter information, and they don't have an issue with it. So over time, they will agree that they don't have an issue with it either, but it slows down the progress. Bottom line, we tell them in the next 12 months, everybody is going to be using this technology. So you as a corporation have a choice to make. You can lead in this race, or you can be the last one across the finish line. And the reason you should lead is because with these tools, you will create better proposals. You'll win more business. You'll reduce the cost of proposal development and the time it takes you to respond. Everything about it is positive, and you should get on board and make it part of your enterprise. When we do presentations in person, we ask the audience to answer this simple question. Going forward with generative AI tools, what is going to make your company the winner? Is it the platform and the tools? Is it the AI-trained proposal professionals? Or is it your best and brightest subject matter experts? Or is it all of the above? And when we run down the query list and ask them to show their hands, 2 or 3 people in the room will say it's the platform and the tools. 5 or 6, maybe 10 will say it's the proposal professionals AI trained. Another 5 or so will say it's the subject matter experts, but 85% of the people will say it's all of the above. It takes every bit of this to be successful going forward. So if you want to learn more about generative AI and how you can use it in your proposal practice, you can take a photo of the QR code held by our 3 little robots, and it will take you to our website where you can learn more about training for proposal professionals who want to learn generative AI. We do the training classes privately for corporations, and we do them publicly for companies that want to send 1 or 2 people. You can also work in our proposal development center where the tools are already up and running, and we have a professional team that can show you how to get everything done. And then we have clients that want their own tenant inside of our multi-tenant proposal development center. And we have a team that will onboard your company to get you started with that. Here's a short description of us as a company, and there's a picture of the 7 books that we've written. We may do an 8th book on generative AI, but I'm kind of going slow on it because I think in 2 years, everybody will say, what's the big deal? We all use it. And maybe I'll write a book about not artificial intelligence, but superior intelligence and how we can solve global problems with that technology. So that's us, Lohfeld Consulting. Thank you so much for spending time with us and listening to our presentation. Now, if you have questions, let's jump right into them.